Hello, hello. So it
Hi.
is so it is actually 7:01. I want to be mindful and respectful to the artist's time. So there may be a few more people trickling in, but I want to give this time for the artist to share more. Hello, everybody. My name is Jordan Robinson. I'm co-curating this exhibition, The Soul of Brooklyn, with Hannah Blanton of Sozo Gallery, and I give the mic to Hannah.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. And it has been such a pleasure working with Jordan on this exhibition. And we've just really been honored to have these three incredible artists join Sozo Gallery. We're happy to represent them and to have this exhibition at the Brooklyn Collective. So thank you all for coming. And I'm going to not waste much time either and turn it back over to Jordan and let him tell you more about each artist and the Brooklyn Collective.
Absolutely, my pleasure. The Brooklyn Collective is a collaboration between entrepreneurs, artists, and locals within the Charlotte community, operating within three historic buildings: Grace Church, the Mecklenburg Investment Company, which was the first Black-owned, design, and ran establishment in the history of Charlotte, as well as a building that's in between that is currently the home of Studio 229 on Brevard. They are a creative entrepreneurial space and events venue focused on helping grow and cultivate entrepreneurs and business owners as well as members within the community. And they, in partnership with Sozo Gallery, have worked together to put up this exhibition to tell the story and the history of the Brooklyn neighborhood now known as Second Ward. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to the three artists who make up the bulk of this exhibition and this nexus of a conversation that we're going to have. First and foremost, I'd like to introduce Beverly Smith. She is a local fiber artist and a resident of the Brooklyn community, I believe in the 1950s onward, which was at its prime of the neighborhood when they were at their most prosperous. And so, from a mixture of her ancestors' stories, drawing from those experiences of her relatives and people in her past, she creates these really fantastic, almost adventurous quilts, incorporating different African traditions within it. Just as a small sneak peek, and she'll share a little later on about some of the African patterns that are shown in there. Which in some folklore is believed to confuse bad spirits so they won't embed themselves into the fabric. But I digress. And to remark on the contemporary side and kind of the issues that are happening to the communities today, you have Percy King. He is working in an interesting and sort of innovative medium. They look like paintings, but they're actually painted layer wood sculptures, depicting of people originally in his earlier career of people in hip hop culture and other sort of influential symbols that helped him in his personal development and his development as an artist. But recently, he has shifted his work talking about family dynamics, and the social issues, especially social injustice and civil rights today, and how that affects the dynamic of him being a father. And then, speaking of family, we have Dr. Dimeji Onafuwa, whose works relate on to the nostalgia and on to in reflecting and focusing on our future and the children who are going to carry that on. In his work, he also imbues specifically Yoruban cultures, traditions, and perspectives into his paintings. And so tonight we're going to hear more from them. And without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I present to you the Soul of Brooklyn. So, to open up with our first question, I'd like to open up this question to all three artists and to Hannah from the perspective of a gallerist and curator as well. And so, uh, what has been your experience connecting artists and collectors? And for the artists, what has your experience been trying to connect with collectors? Hannah, would you like to go since this is probably in your ballpark?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I wanted to unmute myself. For Sozo, our message and value system is always about inspiring soulful connections. So I think in the beginning, at least for my team, we love to connect people to the artist and to the story and to the process. So I think back to your question about connecting people to the collectors. I think it's really important for them to understand what the artist is speaking about and their process and a little bit more about the artist. We really love connecting our clients to the artist and what drives them.
Thank you. And
Maybe,
I think that's really important for emerging collectors.
mhm. Hey Jordan, if I could, from the perspective of the artist, if I could share a little bit. Just actually right before we started this, I got a note from an old collector that has purchased a piece of painting that I did like about a day. Oh, my goodness, over almost 20 years ago, and she sent me a message that she had a husband that was going through cancer treatment, and so because of that, they just purchased a home closer to where he was going to get treated, and they decided to bring the painting along, and then they essentially designed their living room space around that painting. And I feel like that's what it means to have that form of connection with a collector, is where they understand your story, they understand your approach to the work, and they actually essentially carry that story along with them in everyday life. For me, I think my experience with collectors has been something that has quietly grown over the years. So as one, you get one purchase, somebody falls in love with the work, they tell the story to someone else, you connect to a gallery, and that continues to build over time. So it's almost like building a community and kind of like staying connected on the things that are true and make us human.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. One of the first lessons that I learned from a friend slash collector was that don't collect for the money, collect for the love. Look at the artwork that moves you and that you love and that speaks to you in a particular way. Which I think is actually a segue to another question. And to the artists, what is your process when you're making the work? And I think that might be a better moment to focus on that. So to all three of you, what's your process like?
Well, Jordan, if you don't mind, I'll go and share my thoughts on this or my process. What I like to do is connect with human emotion. I do portrait woodwork, 3D portrait woodwork, and for me, that process is so invigorating because it encompasses so many different things. When you're looking at facial expression and trying to relay emotion, I think as humans, we're so adept and so evolved to look at individual expression and gather emotion from that. So what I try to do is connect with that when I try to connect with my audience. So what I like to do is I like to start out with an overall theme of whatever's hitting me at the time. So currently I've been working on pieces that really connect to what's going on today with police brutality and the family dynamic and how we're relating to our children, and really try to capture that moment. So first, what I'll do is I'll take a photo of it, and then I'll sketch it out on computer, and then I end up having to draw it on computer and then try to adjust it as according to the tools that I have. The interesting thing about that is what I found over the years is that everything that I draw doesn't translate into what I can do in wood. So with each piece that I have, I usually have leftover pieces at the end that I end up just tossing out or just getting rid of altogether. So when I do look at some of my pieces, it's glaring to me how I can look at a piece and I can go, there's something missing there, for me, as the artist, but that emotion still translates well with the audience.
I appreciate that insight. Um, Miss Beverly, what about you? What is your process like?
Me myself. Well, my process, thank you everyone for tuning in. My process starts long before I'm in the studio, actually at the sewing machine. I start to visit attic sales, go through vintage stores, and start collecting materials and ideas from old vintage photographs, usually from my family. And then that my inspiration comes from. Then I'm in the studio and I begin to start putting pieces together. But a lot of my ideas come from my mother, who used to use a lot of Southern idioms and metaphors to express herself. I never understood what they meant when I was young, like too much sugar for a dime. She would say something like that, and that stayed with me. I started recording her, writing things down, and I recreate my quilts based on those stories, my history going as far back as the early 1800s. And then I began my physical process with my actual quilting. I do a traditional quilt with the three layers, the backing, the middle with the batting, and the top part of the quilt that has the actual design. And from there, I use a lot of mixed media. Sometimes I may use paint. I use a lot of vintage fabrics that I've collected. And sometimes I may use text. But my process is always one that starts before the actual sewing takes place. And being able to put these stories like my graphite drawings that are a main part of my quilt. I started that when I was in graduate school. I was placed in an advanced painting class, MFA painting class, and they were given yards of canvas to work with. And I'm like, I had to meet this advanced drawing class. So I'm like, what am I going to do with all this canvas? And I started drawing on it. And that's how I started to integrate drawing with my fabric and some of my paint, mixing a lot of different media as part of my quilt. My figures, they come from, as I mentioned before, vintage pictures of my family. Sometimes I'm doing live models of cousins, aunts, sisters, friends. And I'm not necessarily trying to get the exact image of that person, but more so the essence of that person. And so when I'm doing the graphite, which I'm doing on unprimed canvas, and then I sew it like an applique style onto my fabric. Um, it starts to bring ancestors in from the essence of a relative that I may be drawing at this current moment. And that becomes the exciting part for me when I am drawing in ancestors from the past into my art.
Thank you for sharing that. And I think that resonates a little bit with what Dr. Nafwa does in his process. Dimiji, um, can you share a little bit more about your process some more? So I think that does speak to, in particular, what we said before about the Sankofa.
Yeah, so I love a lot of things that both Percy and Miss Beverly said. And one thing I couldn't really capture that really gripped my heart is just the whole idea of capturing the essence of a person as
Mhm.
opposed to the physical likeness of the person. And I feel like my role in this life as an artist is really to capture the human story and to capture the whole human story with layers of meaning. So when you see the canvas, you see something that's explicit, but then as you spend more time with it, maybe you might start to get some, underlying meaning, or maybe you can actually make your own meaning from the canvas. And yes, along the lines of the Sankofa, this is like an ancient and Adinkra symbol. Right before we started, we talked about the Ghanaian culture, and the Sankofa is an Adinkra symbol from Ghana, ancient Ghana, that talks about you have to go back and fetch it. right? You cannot know where you're going to go unless you go back and actually know where you came from. And I feel like that's really the story. As you were talking, Beverly, about just kind of like stitching together things from the history and the past and being able to tell the story of the future that way. I feel like, in a certain way, I feel like I'm doing that maybe just from a different perspective. I'm actually saying this is where what the future looks like,
Mm-hmm.
presenting this version of future for us and say, hey, we can have this type of future, but then we have to essentially embrace that past as well, as it kind of as it overlaps with that future. So some of the things that I use to be able to think through this is I spend more time thinking about the painting than the actual performance of the painting. I spend like about 70% of my time thinking about what needs to go on the canvas, how it needs to look before I actually do the painting itself. And I actually rely on some Yoruba principles, I call them, that allow me to ask myself questions. Is this done yet? So I think about things like appropriateness. Is this piece appropriate for the story I'm trying to tell? Is it cool? And that sense of coolness, the sense of coolness is not necessarily in the color, but even it's in the emotion that's trying to stir up. It's like, does it allow you to have the sense of cool emotion as you're engaging with the canvas? And then is there some sort of like a cleverness or like what you call oju inu, an inner eye, a cleverness with which you kind of present the work to the audience? Is there some improvisation or array? Am I playing with the canvas? Am I playing with the paint? Am I playing with the story? So all of this I cannot, you know, stealing again from Beverly, I cannot use that as a way to quilt this story of a painting. So that, and I know that the painting is complete when he accomplishes all of this.
And I think that ties in beautifully into some of the next things I was curious about and what was hoping y'all would be willing to share. So from the very beginning in learning about each of you and your work, one of the primary things that I understood as far as your inspirations, there are several factors. So for you, Dimeji, the Fauvism and the figurative impressionists out in the Bay Area in San Francisco, Henry Matisse were major influences in some of your works. And Beverly, like your family narratives and stories seem to be a huge influence. And in your case in particular with fiber, I'm very curious did you go into fiber and quilts? And Percy, for you, same thing with your medium. What inspired you to uh, make these sort of portraitures and paintings out of the wood carvings that you and sculptures that you do? Can you all further expand on that?
Yes, I'll start. And Dimiji, I use a lot of Yoruba traditions in my work as well. Okay, starting like my fabrics and the patterns I like for my quilting, they are patchwork. That's where my grandmother started with patchwork. And when I would visit her in Blacksburg, South Carolina, and she would cover me with that particular quilt, uh, that made an impression with me. So even to this day, when I'm selecting vintage quilts or creating my own, which I have time now to put my own patterns together, always doing this offbeat phrasing um, that you see in kente cloth. And my ancestors felt that it kept evil spirits from working into the fabric when you had this pattern that kind of danced around, that meandered throughout. And so I'm always doing the patchwork quilts that I recognize from my grandmother. But also, once I started graduate school and learning more about African textiles, I realized, wow, that was something that my ancestors before my grandmother, how they would incorporate that into their textiles. I used to create these igunguns that would spin and have this fabric that would flare out. And I would have a lot of patchwork in that. So I'm bringing in the old with the new, and I'm always mixing and layering my African culture with my Southern roots, very important to me. But a lot of it stems from my grandmother and that first initiative influence on what quilts meant to me.
That is lovely. When you said when you talked about the egungus, yeah, the masquerades and the really colorful, layered patterns and stuff like that. That brought back lots of memories for me.
Have you,
Yes.
I'm sorry, have you seen an actual egungun performance?
Oh yeah, oh yeah, oh
Oh my
yeah.
gosh.
Especially when you're having like a new king being in being instated in Shagamu where I was from. There's like always like there's a curfew, and then there's an Egungun performance like right after the curfew. It's elaborate
Yes.
and it's quite impressive.
Hmm.
But I think we talked about some of the Yoruba influences. A lot of my early influences were contemporary Nigerian painters. So when
Hmm.
you go to the Museum of Art and you go to the
Hmm.
African art part,
Hmm.
what you usually see is like the sculptures and the masks and all that stuff. But I'm
Right.
talking like contemporary painters that actually have worldwide worldwide um, uh, fame and that actually are painters. Like a gentleman by the name of Kolade Oshinowo is one of them. Really inspires my work. One of my mentors, Sonya Ojikutu, is a great painter as well. He actually lives in the Maryland area. And then also, like you were saying, just learning the fundamentals of drawing and painting. There's no
Hmm.
other way to understand the line but understanding the work of a Henry Matisse,
Hmm.
the contour line and the
Hmm.
simplicity of the line and how
Hmm.
that kind of like can be, so expressive, and the way he actually layered colors on the canvas before people started thinking about using bright colors. And
Hmm.
then thinking about folks like Kerry James Marshall and
Hmm.
Amy Sherrod. Kerry
Hmm.
James Marshall actually represents the meaning of blackness, celebrating blackness as a
Hmm.
good thing,
Hmm.
and
Yes.
actually talking about having these faces that are very opaque and
Hmm.
actually
Hmm.
making those faces in their simplest forms
Hmm.
something to be celebrated. I think I
Yes.
really love his work.
Yes.
And then we think, and then as you said, the San Francisco Bay Area figurative expressionists, particularly a gentleman by the name of Nathan Olivera. What I like about their work is they really redefine what it means to have a figure on a canvas. And so back when everybody was shifting to abstract expressionists,
Hmm.
they're saying we're going to put a figure on a canvas, but it's not a person; it's a figure, and that
Hmm.
figure is part of that composition, and that
Hmm.
figure is actually making that canvas better. It's not it doesn't need to be the focal point of the canvas, is only part of the canvas. And
Hmm.
so I that's why I like to have the figure represented on the canvas, and then you have this space, this
Yeah.
absent presence filling the rest of the canvas. So it's kind of like
Hmm.
this back and forth dialogue between the figure
Hmm.
and the background. So
Yes.
there's just a few people whose work I'm really excited about, but I could give you like billions of people. Any artist would admit to you that they draw inspiration from just about anyone that's doing, the craft. Anyone that's a dedicated artist that's been doing it for a while.
Hmm.
We tend to, you'll see the conversation Beverly and Percy and I are already having. We tend to
Hmm.
inspire each other in the work that we
Right.
do.
Right.
Yeah.
And
And
I think for me, with my work, my inspiration was kind of layered, and the way I got into the medium that I'm working in is kind of layered. I've always been an artist, heavy sketchbook artist, drawer. And once I got into sports, I kind of left it alone. But one of the catalysts is that really launched the inspiration for why I work in the way I work is actually from a DNA test that my mother gave to me, an ancestry DNA test in 2007. And the results came back and told me that I was 60%, my genealogy was 60% Ga Adangbe, which is in the Ivory Coast or the Gold Coast, which is current day Ghana. And the more and more I started researching on the Gadongbe people, which I didn't know anything about, and vaguely knew about Adinkra symbols, seeing them here and there. But the more I started studying up on it, I started to understand that this is something I wanted to incorporate into my art and in my woodworking. So, as I looked at, pictures online, I started seeing pictures of coffins by an artist named Pajo, who creates these elaborate burial coffins that look like sculptures, but they are actually burial coffins. And then, tables and furniture, I drew inspiration from all of those because the furniture, which also included the Adinkra symbols and different symbology, like with the kente cloths, they not only served a functional purpose, but they also served a spiritual purpose. Now, when I started working and thinking about what I wanted my woodwork to look like as I'm making different things, tables and chairs and, bedroom sets, things like that, I didn't want to copy exactly that aesthetic, but I did want to copy the spirit of that. I wanted something spiritual within my work. I wanted it to, be my work to serve as a spiritual and a functional purpose. So what I ended up doing is, creating a, so what I ended up doing is really focusing on how to create Black American style furniture. I always say there was a ton of, Black painters and Black carpenters and Black owned furniture businesses, but there wasn't anything that I was aware of that was distinctly Black American. So that was the path that I started going down. And one of my original thoughts was to start doing inlays into cabinets and tabletops. And eventually that's how I ended up here. I started in on my first project and decided that, halfway through it, I was saying that this is a piece of art and this is the direction I want to go. And it's been what I've been doing ever since.
I appreciate you for sharing that. And that goes further in, when another thing I want to acknowledge is that y'all, all three of you, have had some intimate tie and understanding into the history of the Brooklyn neighborhood, and for different reasons. Beverly, you're actually, again, you have family that were from here, and Dimeji, you're a researcher along as a designer and painter. And you had shared with me that you've done some extensive research here. And Percy, you are a history buff. And so I'm wondering, when it came to this exhibition and trying to uh, prepare artwork for it, why did you choose the pieces that you chose? And Hannah can chime in as well if y'all wanted. But in this exhibition, I guess, why did y'all choose the work that you chose for the body of work to be represented for this exhibition?
And I'm definitely going to love for Hannah to chime in here, because this was in conversation with Hannah and just deliberation about what to include and what not. But I think for me, I think even as a society, we're in a very, very weird time. And the 2020 is going to go down in the ages as one of those years that was quite unexpected and quite challenging for a lot of people. And one of the pieces that I had, the story of a little girl with the world at her fingertips, was really quite a response to what type of future are we trying to create for for those that are coming after us. Is it a feature that includes them, or is it a feature that they feel very much like they're not participating in? And so this was my thinking around that, where it's like we're all, Jordan, you and I had this conversation that we're all products of multiple paths. We don't have one linear past, and our past is like a a combination of different perspectives, different histories. Some of us different continents, like Percy just talked about. That his past, even he has some some Ghanaian and Gold Coast in his blood. And so, so that particular painting, I wanted that to be an anchor piece for the show because it really tells the story of our feature and tells us that we can actually create a feature that works for us. But I'm gonna pause and then I'm gonna let others speak as well and see if Anna can chime in as well.
Yeah, I completely agree, Dimeji, as far as your work. To answer your question, Jordan, I think it is a lot about the future. And I think his work makes you pause and see these children really contemplating what I think is, just really deep in thought. And it was really interesting during the opening. Some of you may have caught the picture that we took of a young girl. I think she is 14, and she came with her older sister and her parents, and she was standing there really studying that piece. And it does make you think, she was on the outside looking in. And I think that's very reflective of the work at the Brooklyn Collective too. They are constantly thinking about others and how we can include others and how we can do programming together. And it was a great centerpiece. And it just sold last week to a collector in Oregon, which we were really happy about. So that was great. And then do you want me to talk about Percy and Beverly's work as well, Jordan, or?
Yeah, I mean, totally.
Wow. And the question was why you and I selected these works.
Yeah, well, why those particular pieces of works in the body? Because I kind of came a little bit afterwards and was starting to really connect the dots, but I feel like y'all laid the pieces there.
Yeah, and then I think Percy we can laugh together, and we had some great time showing more of his first collection, and a really respected curator that we love in town came and gave us some more feedback, and she challenged Percy a little bit and said, why these artists that everyone knows? Why not try people that we don't know? And I think Percy did an amazing job with that, really capturing these children and their expressions, especially their expressions with everything that's been going on since COVID and these unnecessary deaths. And Percy and I've had some great conversations. I've literally sat there and cried looking at his work with everything going on in our country. And it's just, gosh, Percy and I have had some incredible conversations, and I'm so grateful for that. And then that just allows us as gallerists and people that are selling work and curators to have those conversations with other people. And then Beverly, yes, we've had some incredible times talking about her artwork as well. And I don't want to spoil the really crazy surprise that we found out during this exhibition. Is that coming later, Jordan, with Beverly's work?
It can, actually.
Well, I'll save it for Beverly to share.
Yeah.
But it is pretty remarkable how showing Beverly's work here at the Brooklyn Collective has been just a beautiful tie-in. And so yeah, I think we selected these works because of the children. And Abel Jackson did an amazing mural outside of the Brooklyn Collective that has these 3 children looking out to the destruction of Brooklyn. And I think all 3 of these artists did a great job with children, and it really just promotes this incredible conversation about the direction we're going into, and hopefully will shift our community into forward thinking.
Thank you for that. I guess Percy and Beverly, I guess that just leaves to y'all two, or actually Beverly, I think that leads to you. Why, with the body of work that you selected, what moved you to select the quilts that you did?
Well, I can start. I have 4 quilts on exhibit, and they all are about children. I retired this year, May, but I was still teaching when everything shut down March the 13th. So I'm a big advocate for education, especially for girls. But I also have quilts that depict doll play and the importance of psychology behind children being able to play with the dolls, including boys, and how that helps them to develop sensitivity and an understanding of humanity. Um, but the pieces are dated from different time periods. When I grew up in Charlotte, and I have to tell you, I knew nothing about the Brooklyn community, the Brooklyn village. I only heard my old about Second Ward High School versus West Charlotte High School, but I had no idea that Second Ward was in Brooklyn. And then I took a tour of the gallery, 229 upstairs up to the third floor, and my head began to spin. I got really dizzy. And there were a lot of artifacts that were in place on the third floor. And I understood how John Teller that helped start the business community in Brooklyn in 1920 used to have meetings there. And it was a lot for me to take in. I didn't know what was going on, but when I got home, the first thing I started to do, I wanted to take a nap because that's how drained I was. But I started researching and I found out that emancipated slaves, some of the first emancipated slaves, were drawn to that area. And it was an area where nobody really wanted to live. It was like low country. And all the wastes would like come down in that area. But I think about the slaves, how you're talking about pulling yourself up from the bootstraps, how they created something from nothing. And then I started researching more. And I have to tell you this, the church, Grace Church, that is part of the Brooklyn Collective, I have a great cousin. I have old pictures and everything that did a sermon at that church. He passed away right there at the pulpit from a heart attack. And I used to hear my family talk about this all the time. And as a little girl, that story stays with me because in my head, I'm seeing this person doing a sermon and actually falling, not able to give up, not able to get up, not able to see their family again, right there in the pulpit. And that was a person that belonged to me. But I did not realize this was actually until I started doing some research and trying to find out about real lives in Brooklyn Village, not just the maps that you see, not just the economic devastation to the community there, but the real people that live there, the flowers, the fruits that they would eat, that they would pick. And so I'm still doing my research, but the more I research, the more I find my actual connection and the more it makes why I was like becoming overwhelmed as I toured the building. So, with my work being exhibited at the intersection, I think that's what they're titling the gallery now.
Yeah, it's the intersection.
Yeah, I still feel like, am I worthy to be there? Can I live up to these people that came from absolutely nothing, Wall Street in Charlotte? And I'm also getting very excited talking to my other artists because we don't get to really talk about art and what's motivating us. And as everybody's sharing, I'm like, oh, I think that same way. Oh, I have that same idea. Oh, that's what inspires me as well. And Dimeji, when you talk about Cheryl and Marshall and their figures that are so opaque. Marshall's pictures that are so gifted the eyes, because my graphite drawings on those really bright patchwork quilts, uh, it was a little difficult for me to understand how that was going to come together for me, and what that truly meant. But those figures are important as we include them in our artworks, and how they are, it's a legacy that's carrying on. Sometimes we don't always understand the time while we're creating them, and why we're having such an asymmetric, like Dimitri in the corner of his work, or Percy with his wooden cut layers and layers, sometimes 3, 4 layers deep, and then my graphite drawings. But it's all coming from a past, and it is preparing for the future. These people that they never go away. They're always, yeah, I do get a little excited because we're not, this is like the first time we're able to really discuss our art and where all of this is coming from. But the Brooklyn Collective is like, it's like happening for a reason. And even when our works come down, I don't believe that it'll be over.
Yeah, so I definitely believe that there's all of this is cyclical to me, you know. I think when we were even when we were coming up with the name of the exhibition, you know, I felt like we were still all operating sort of within a spirit that was there before. And the more I learned about the neighborhood, I realized that I think we are sort of operating in the same sort of energy that the people here operated before. And
Right.
so that goes to my next question about, like, for you as the artists, for each of you, what do you want people to remember about you as an artist in your work, whether it's pertaining to this exhibition or in the future? I think that's very important because it's going to come back in cycles in some form or way, I think.
I think as for me and this exhibition and me as an artist in the future, I really want to be looked at or remembered for someone who was able to connect with the audience, someone who was able to have people ask themselves the questions of how are they responding to the world when they look at my work. When you look at some of the pieces that I chose for this exhibition in particular, they're ones that force the viewer to interact with the piece and put themselves in the picture, in the story of how we're connecting with our children during these times. So for instance, the piece that I have that's actually of my daughter, called Innocence Deferred, I wanted her to be featured in a way where the audience has to picture themselves about how they would talk to their child about these times. So that's the way I want to be viewed with my work. I do plan on, I want to do, larger scale works, but right now that's where I'm looking at and headed.
Yeah, I think for me, I think I want my work to be seen as something that bridges racial, cultural, social boundaries. I think I want my work to be a work that is collected from by people at all backgrounds with all different experiences about around art. Early collectors, from early collectors to serious collectors, and I want people to see the work in the work, a sense of, like we talked earlier today, a sense of peace, kindness, and humanity that is important to all of us, that connects all of us, because I feel like that's what makes us, or allows us to tell the story of how we can live together in this world. So that's what I want my work to reflect, something that you look at it and you just take a deep sigh, and a good sigh, and there's something about it that just connects with you, regardless of what your background is.
Beverly, what about you?
Okay, and I would say that I think about that, but I I would like for people to gain a sense of history and
Uh-oh. Miss Beverly, are you still there?
I think she dropped. I think we lost
Oh
her.
no. Ah. All right, when she gets back, we'll get back to her on that one. Um,
It's
eh, oh, Beverly, are you back? No, I don't think so. All right. In the meantime, yeah, she dropped. She'll come back in a second. But moving on to the next one, what artists, y'all talked a bit about these, and I kind of want to further expand. Oh, and I think Beverly's back. Beverly, can you hear us okay? Okay. Well, while she's still getting that done, my next question is, what artists inspire you? What other creatives and people have you been looking into that influenced a lot of your work today, and onward?
Well, for me, I know this guy's the kind of the artist of the hour right now, and he's everybody's favorite. But it's Kehinde Wiley for me. When I look at the way he captures the Black experience, and the Brown experience from people of all throughout the world, it's something that I really connected with right off the bat. And for me, one of the first pieces that I actually connected with was one of the first times that I had actually gone to the Columbus Museum of Art, since I was in kindergarten. And I actually bought a reprint of the piece. It's this one right here, of a person that he did in his first museum exhibition in Columbus, Ohio in 2006. And when I saw it, I so connected with it, because when I started leaning towards this process and the subject matter that I wanted to cover, one of my other inspirations was a trip that I took to the Louvre in Paris, France. And I'm walking through the museum, and I'm seeing different pieces, and I'm looking at these works. And I tell people all the time, like, if you're, with me having a sports background, once you're in the NFL and you're actually there playing it and seeing it in person, you start to understand that these are human beings. These goals are attainable. It's just a game. And when I was at the Louvre, I'm looking at these paintings and I'm seeing the people that are in them, and then going to Amsterdam and visiting the Vincent van Gogh Museum. And I'm saying to myself, these are just people trying to tell their story, even the subject matter. They may have been kings or queens or the Mona Lisa or many other things, but they're still 17, 18, 19, 20-year olds who just want to be captured on canvas for eternity. So when I started doing my work, and I started doing hip hop artists, I wanted to pay tribute to an art form, a music art form that is truly American and has really, changed, global culture with this form of music. So I wanted to pay tribute to those artists that actually inspired me in a way that I had seen the same people, the same, contemporaries in, the Louvre Museum, paying tribute to those people who inspired them. So, like I said, Kehinde Wiley was definitely the first one that I really connected with, who was definitely on the same page as what I was thinking about at the time.
Okay, and Dimeji,
Cool.
oh, Beverly, I think you're back. Can you hear us
yeah, I'm
okay?
back in.
Okay.
Uh, and so I'm sorry, I probably went out when the question was posed. Sorry.
No, it's fine. Do you want to finish your thought, and then we can go to you for the question that asked while you were out was, what other artists inspire you?
Oh, um, Faith Ringgold. I first heard of her quilts and how when she was really young, um, she would she suffered from asthma really badly, and she couldn't go to school a lot, so she would draw a lot. But as she got older and she wanted her works to go to Europe, really far places, and it was very expensive, she started painting on fabric, and that way she could roll it up and ship it off um, without a high expense. But I always loved how she told her stories and painted on her quilts. And then also, I love Betty Saar, and she is an assemblage artist that uh, combines found, and she uses a lot of her family history to tell her story. Um, and one of my favorite pieces was the liberation of Aunt Jemima. That's one of her pieces where she has Aunt Jemima with a
Who's Beverly again?
Yeah, it seems like we did. But I think a lot, I just along the lines of what you were saying, I really love Faith Ringgold's work. I had
in the
goosebumps. Oh, I think yeah, she's coming back again. But I had goosebumps when Percy talked about Kehinde Wiley as well. He's definitely one of the greats now.
It might be. All right, I'll keep an eye out for Beverly again. So the last question that I would have would be for everybody is actually second to last. There was a question I skipped earlier, and I'm just going to rephrase it. For emerging artists in particular, what advice would you leave for them? I think that's very important, especially for people coming in to the art world. What advice would y'all have for them? And Hannah, please chime in.
I'll go first in case I cut off again.
That's a better idea.
Yeah. But I would say stay true to your art. That wonderful feeling that you got when you first started creating, try to keep that in perspective. Um, Look at artists that you admire, and there's nothing wrong with emulating them. When I taught high school, I would have my students pick out an artist they really liked and to copy them, not to use their work, but to understand why they put that stroke there, why they use that particular color, um, why they had that particular concept. So emulate an artist that you admire. Uh, Keep your art form close to your heart. That what makes you feel really good, and keep it. Don't be afraid to experiment and travel if you can. Travel if you can. Get that passport together. We're going to be out there again before you know it, and enjoy. Just enjoy the process going life. Your artwork, you'll enjoy it better, and it won't be a burden on you because it can get stressful sometimes. And be patient with your family because if they don't create art, they sometimes don't understand, like, when you make that wrong stroke or something and you have to start all over, and it just drives you insane. So stay true to your art.
Thank you for
Yeah.
that. Dimeji?
And to add to that, TJ Reddy, I think about 12 years ago, came to my studio and I asked him for advice, and his advice stayed with me for the rest. He's gone now, but really wonderful advice was you really have to keep painting because that's the one thing, or keep making art because that's the
Mhm.
one thing the world cannot take away from you. You're going to have high moments. You're going to sell lots of pieces. You're going to have low moments and not sell anything, but you just have to keep putting the work in. And that's something that stuck with me. I always remember that. I feel incomplete when I'm not making art, and I think that's really important. And the second thing I would say is find your style. Don't find somebody else's style. Find your style and be yourself. Especially African artists and African and Black artists and African American artists. There's a trend, particularly painters. There's a trend now. There are lots of people painting in this general style. And you have to be careful that you just don't follow the herd. You have to, like Beverly said, learn from the greats, but find your style, because I think that's the only way you can actually truly become great. And that might happen when you're no longer here. People might fall in love with the work when you're not here, but that's okay. Find your style. And I think the third thing I would say is tell your story. Don't let anyone else tell your story. Tell your story. Why do you create art? Why do you love the art? It doesn't have to be the most articulate story, but there is a story within each and every one of us, and just being able to just come out there and tell that story is really important. And these are the little bits of advice that folks have given me over the years, and I would love, that's what I would pass on to a young artist that's coming.
And for me, I'd say to new and emerging artists, just experience life as much as possible. Get out, see as many things as you can, expose yourself to as many different forms of music, culture, art, travel as much as possible. You never know where your inspiration is going to come from and how you'll use your senses in different places. I can recall a time in particular, I was in Granada, Spain, and it was the first time I was out about in the city by myself where I could not speak Spanish and I could not read Spanish. And you have to rely on different senses, or it'll be interesting for you to find out which senses you use, whether it's smell and, it's smell and sight. That's the only things you have to rely on. And you're basically walking around instinctual, and that develops something in me, and it's kind of stuck with me. As far as mediums, work with as many different mediums as you can get your hands on. For me, people ask me how long I've been doing art, but I tell them, I've been an artist for over 20 years because that's how long I've been practicing woodwork. I didn't just jump on, in the shop and start doing these things overnight. It's been a 20-year process to get to this point. And once you become so fluid at something, you basically can create whatever your mind can think of. And, it's been a great format for me because I've been able to combine two different mediums, woodwork and artwork, and really kind of find my own lane and find my own voice and tell the stories that I want to tell the best way I know how.
Greatly appreciate that. And then leading into that, my final question, and after that we'll open the floor to general questions. What's next for each of you? Oh, and I'm sorry, actually, Hannah, would you like to answer the previous question? Like the advice that you would have for emerging artists as well?
Yes. I mean, I agree with all the artists. I think it's really important for the artists to stay true to themselves. And I agree with Percy that I would encourage emerging artists to attend as many lectures as you can, go to as many art openings and events and hear other artists speak, go to museum openings, and just keep educating yourself and listening. But also, when the world gets too busy or too loud, to go to nature, because I think a lot of times artists need to reset, and newer artists want to start doing what they think people want versus what comes from within. And I think as someone that loves artists and respects artists and wants to sell their work, when the work is authentic and it comes from within, then it's so much easier to sell. So yeah. And then I wrote down, be true to yourself and to journal. To journal for emerging artists when they're first creating, I think is really important. So yeah, that's what I would suggest.
Thank you. All right, and then on to the last question. What is next for each of our artists here?
For me, there's no telling. I'm going to continue to finish this series. I'm currently working on a commission piece for the Columbus Museum of Art right now. But after that, I'm really looking to even explore different mediums as well. I have access to a large workshop now, the use of a friend's workshop, but it's going to allow so many other possibilities for me. So I'm actually looking into more sculptural based art, more textural based art, and really just, again, playing with different mediums to find out, what else I can do, and what other mediums I can use.
And I think quickly for me, I think I'd say that I'm trying to build a body of work for 2021. I'm having a couple of conversations I think I want to loop Hannah into before I make any public statements about them, and see what her thoughts are about them. And then also I'm just trying to essentially grow young collectors and just try to get them to fall in love not only with painting, but also, to consider owning a piece of my work as well. I just get them to start thinking about feeling like I too can own a piece of painting. So I think, yeah, those are my goals for 2021.
And oh, am I next?
Yeah.
Well, I would say, I'm writing a grant, and I'm preparing for a one-woman show. That's what I have so far. So I'm just busy creating lots of quilts and doing a lot of writing. Am I still on?
Yeah, you're on.
Okay, good. I didn't
So
go
you said,
off.
yeah, a lot of writing.
Yes, a lot of writing, preparing for a grant, and looking for some studio space, uh, and preparing for a one-woman show. So I'm creating a lot of quilts at this time.
It's really nice to know. So now at this point, I know we have a little bit more time, probably about 5 minutes, 5 to 10 minutes of questions for guests that joined in on the Zoom, or for anybody who's watching in on Facebook. If you could please, for anyone in the Zoom, please feel free to ask any questions if you have any. And for those on Facebook, if you type your questions in the comment section, I will relay them over here to answer. So does anyone have questions? Well, I
Guess we answered everything already.
yeah, for the most part, I was
That's a
trying to
good
see.
thing.
Yeah, this is great. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. In addition, Beverly, since you dropped on one of them, I do kind of want to revisit that. When you were talking about Faith Ringgold, I kind of wanted to make sure you got to finish your thought on that while questions are coming in. Would you like to further expand? This was on the question about what other artists have been influencing you.
Oh yes, and I think I was talking about Betty Saar, and how she is an assemblage artist that combines a lot of found objects together, but how she uses a lot of her family history to create her stories. But she's also a catalyst for women's rights, Black Lives Matter, before, other artists were speaking out. And I use her work a lot. It's an inspiration to me in my own art. But I think that's what I was speaking on Faith Ringgold, Betty Saar, and then there's a contemporary quilter, Bisa Butler, and how she's doing some unbelievable things with the tiniest pieces of fabric there. She's also, she reflects a lot on her family history as well, and those ancestors that came before us. So the three of them inspire me quite a bit.
Well, I know for me, and one other personal question that I have, what piece, whether it's your own or the other artists in the exhibition, is your favorite?
Oh, I will take that one. And
Okay.
well, I have pieces from both artists that I really love. But I'll start with Percy's artwork of his daughter. And the framing, was that for one other artist or some? Yes, that's from one of the artists, right? I can answer that one, Jordan.
Yes, I think you can, actually.
Okay, yeah. So Percy's piece of his daughter, I love the frame and I love how he captured her. And she has like this side view, but slightly looking over her shoulder. And then when he tells the story about having those discussions with them, like what's happening right now, things they're seeing that happening in the streets and with the COVID-19. I just love that whole positioning of his daughter, slightly looking over her shoulder, and me of a frame that my Aunt Sarah would have had in her house. So even though he's talking the future, uh, that framing is like, holding her in from something that's very old and dear. And Dimeji, I really love the little boy with the globe, the world in his hand. And I love how, like I said, he's doing these asymmetrical designs where this little person is in this huge painting. And but he's like playing with this ball that's uh symbolic of the globe, like that is our future. And that's so important to me now with them closing schools and opening schools. And a piece that I'm doing has to do with like young children, preschoolers graduating, how my own high school students missed their graduation, and how we're already fighting so Head Start to be able to be a part of our education system. And that piece, I always think about that with that little boy in that corner holding the world in his hand. So those are my favorite pieces. I can't afford them right now, but they're still my favorites.
Percy and Dimeji, what about you?
I, I agree on. I think I would actually second Beverly on Percy's piece that it's called. I think it's called Innocence Deferred. I love I love. I think it reminds me of a master's painting where there's I think there's a portrait of a young woman or something like that where one of those old masters that it's kind of like makes it almost masters like, but then also very relatable. Like it's like somebody I know. It's really really well done. The way the face is turned towards you. In Beverly's work, I think and this is going to be like a tricky way to say this. It's like I just love all of your quilts, and I'm not sure if I can actually say, hey, here's one that's my favorite, because I just fall in love with her quilts, and I don't even know which ones are in the show. I like the one that's the rite of passage. I think that's really beautiful, just like the intricacy of the colors and the crosses that are all the way just kind of like bleeding through it. And then they plant a seed as well, where it's just I'm not even sure if that one is in the show as well, but I really love that as well. But yeah, but I think I mentioned to you a few times that I'm definitely I'm a secret stalker. I'm a fan of your work, so definitely.
All right, Percy, you're the last one, and then we have some questions from the audience.
Well, I mean, everybody's work is amazing. I mean, Dimeji, your work with the little boy holding the globe, almost is it with the background, it's the future is bright. The world is yours. The child can be anything that it wants to be. It actually, I was reminded of that piece not too long ago. I heard a rapper doing an interview. His name is the Jizza from the Wu-Tang Clan. He said that once a pawn crosses the board in chess, it becomes whatever it wants to be. And it reminds me of that passage of us growing up and crossing over into adulthood. And once we become adults, we can become whatever we want to be. And that's what that reminded me of. And that's why I like that piece so much. And as for Beverly's pieces, I love the symbolism. I love the personal meaning that's in each one of those quilts. So, you know, the things I love about your quilts and Beverly's quilts are consistent through all of her pieces. You know, one of the things being the red shoes and the story behind those, the fact that she puts messages sews messages within those quilts that are not even made known to the people in an exhibition until after someone actually may even purchase it. She'll let them know about that. But her putting her spirit or soul into those quilts is what I love about each and every one of them. So I don't think I could say one of them could be my favorite, because again, it's her process and the passion she puts in each one that I love about each of them.
Awesome. And so we got a couple of questions in from the audience on Facebook from Marissa Pascucci. And they ask specifically, particularly like a book or a poem or a song, what other arts inspire you? And I think they mean like in terms of disciplines. It's kind of a remix from a previous question, just in a different medium. Is my understanding.
I like that question because I am inspired by so much music, and I love all kinds of music. I love classic rock. I can get inspired by that. 60s music, jazz. Coltrane is one of my favorites. Angelina Cujo is a favorite artist of mine. I would listen to her music whenever I was in Senegal and Kenya. And so, yeah, music. And then also paintings. I love paintings. I can crawl into a painting and actually feel like I'm a part of that environment. So, yeah, I like that question on a lot of different disciplines.
Mm-hmm. And I think for me, I'll say music is really big. Every painting I do, I create a playlist for it. So yeah, so it's like, so when I was doing the water series, I was like, I had a water playlist going on with all sorts of songs that I have to do with water from way back when, all the way up to Rizzo and others. and then also I love some poetry. I like the work from poets from the Harlem Renaissance. I remember I did a painting once called Sea Calm. It was essentially a rendition of Langston Hughes' poem called Sea Calm. So it was like a direct taking that poem and actually translating it into a painting and responding to it. So I love that as well. And then I have a brother that's an author and he writes quite a few books, and so I kind of love nonfiction writing. I love nonfiction and even fiction at certain points that are sort of storytelling. So I tend to I read a few books every time I get the chance to do that, and sometimes that they influence my work. But I think it's just a mark of an artist. You just have to find inspiration everywhere, right? And you have to find inspiration in the things you love. And even in conversations, I have a conversation with another artist. I'm like, oh, I got to do this. I got to respond to it somehow.
I think for me, it's going to be tied in with my earlier pieces. One, hip hop music, with my first series being Legends of Hip Hop, which were my favorite top 10 rappers. But the way that influences me is that I like to put multiple messages within each of my pieces. Some of my pieces, I've been told that they're almost too complicated, or it's kind of like an inside joke for me that I'm the only one who gets it, because I put so much symbolism and care into the number. Like, for instance, there's one with a bunch of roses. I put symbolism into the number of roses, the number of diamonds. Why are there crystals on there? And those are things that I have to explain. The audience won't necessarily be able to just look at those pieces and understand them right away. But like with rap music, a lot of times there's things that you don't catch the first time you hear it. You have to listen to it over and over and over again. And then also hear the artist put it in context for you. So I guess that's pretty much the biggest way that the music influences my work.
I appreciate that. And if our audience on Zoom doesn't have any more questions, the final question that I see on Facebook, and it's been partially answered, but from Gary Bastian, he was asking, what ways can we get, can people get in touch with y'all? I know one quick way is definitely go to Hannah Blanton for Sozo Gallery. They just posted their contacts in the comment, since the gallery is representing all three artists. But I'm sure there are other ways to stay connected with y'all. So how else can people keep in touch with you?
The easiest is Instagram, art by Percy at Instagram.
Instagram for me as well, Quilt Bev.
And art by Dimeji on Instagram, and I'm always rambling on Twitter and other places as well. So, yeah, I'm sure you'll find me.
Fair enough. Yeah, especially Twitter. So fun. Well, that seems to sum it up for everyone. Again, thank you all for making up this panel and for your time. Thank you everybody who's tuned in on Facebook, and thank you everyone who joined in on the Zoom call to hear more about these artists, their work, and the community that we are uplifting through celebrating art, supporting entrepreneurship, and celebrating people in the community. So thank you all, and hope you have a great night.
Thank you, Jordan. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you. Bye all.